If building your business requires something of you that doesn't match your current identity, who you believe yourself to be, then there's going to be a misalignment. And that misalignment creates resistance, exhaustion, and sometimes self-sabotage. The traditional approach to business growth focuses almost exclusively on strategy and tactics. It says, here's what you need to do to be successful, but it rarely addresses who you need to be to execute those strategies effectively. That's where identity alchemy comes in. It's all about intentionally transforming who you are to align with what you want to create. Hello and welcome to Pleasure and Profits. I'm your host, Rachel Anzalone. We are well into the spring quarter now, where we've been focusing on growth and implementation and this beautiful energy of emergence and action that this season brings. If you tuned into episode 43, we explored how to align your business planning with the seasons, both the literal seasons of the year and the metaphorical seasons that you might be experiencing in your life and in your business. Today, we're going to dive into something even more fundamental than planning. Because while plans are essential, they're only as powerful as the person executing them. Today, we're going to explore what I call identity alchemy, the transformative process of becoming the person you need to be to build the business you want to have and to create the impact that you're meant to make in the world. This topic feels particularly vulnerable and timely for me because just last weekend, I had an experience that brought this concept to life in a really profound way. I participated in the live practicum of a training program where I developed and delivered a talk to the other participants. It was a significant step in my own journey from being the person behind the scenes, which I've been for over 2 decades, supporting other entrepreneurs and thought leaders, to stepping forward as the creator of my own framework, my own message, my own brand. What I realized through that experience and what I want to share with you today is that sustainable business growth isn't just about what you do. It's about who you become in the process. Something I've been really aware of for a very long time, from the earliest days of my stepping into entrepreneurship. But what was really driven home through this experience, and what I really want to share with you today, is that sustainable business growth isn't just about what you do. It's about who you become in the process of doing all of those things. It's about the identity shift that must take place for you to hold the vision, embrace the opportunities, and navigate the challenges that come with building a soul-aligned business. So today I'm going to share some insights from my recent experience. I'm going to share a story about a revelation that I had years ago at a labyrinth, which actually became the foundation of the talk that I gave last weekend. And I'm going to offer some practical guidance on how you can identify and then step into that identity that will support you in your biggest business dreams. Because here's what I know to be true. When you focus on becoming the most expansive and aligned version of yourself first, then the right actions naturally follow. And that alignment is where the real magic happens. Let's dive into it. Last weekend was a significant milestone for me. While I have presented on stages many, many times before, those presentations have always been practical, tactical trainings, what Gay Hendricks would call working in my zone of excellence. As a naturopath, I gave monthly talks on various health topics. In my restaurant days, I used to give trainings all the time on a variety of topics, including how to pull the perfect espresso shot. I could teach marketing strategies, implementation techniques, and business operations in my sleep. That stuff is all super comfortable territory for me. But this talk was different. This talk was rooted in what I believe is my zone of genius, the work that I'm truly meant to be doing in this world. So it wasn't about tactics. It was about transformation. It was about the framework I've developed after decades of observing what truly creates sustainable success. What made this particularly vulnerable is that these ideas, this philosophy about impact, profit, and pleasure working in harmony, these are things I've been saying quietly behind the scenes for decades, whispering them to clients when the cameras weren't rolling, gently suggesting them in strategy sessions when I saw entrepreneurs burning themselves out. I've known these truths in my bones for many, many years, but until recently, I haven't claimed them publicly as my message. Standing in that room, delivering my talk, I found myself experiencing the friction that comes with an identity shift. I was stepping from behind the curtain and saying, this is what I believe. This is what I've seen work time and time again. This is the framework I've developed. And claiming that space felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The interesting thing about this kind of transformation is that it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments as choices are made, in tiny acts of courage. For me, it was saying yes to this training program in the first place. It was gradually building this podcast and sharing my framework piece by piece. It was crafting my talk even when my inner critic was screaming that it wasn't good enough. And ultimately, it was standing up in that room and owning my message despite the fear. What I discovered in that room surprised me. As I shared my story about the labyrinth, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, I felt something shift. I wasn't just telling a story that had happened to me years ago. I was embodying the lessons from that story in real time. I was stepping into the joy and expansion right there in that moment. The feedback I received afterward confirmed what I felt internally. People connected with the message because I was connecting with it. The authenticity that comes from alignment between who you are and what you're sharing is magnetic. You cannot fake that kind of resonance. This experience highlighted something so crucial about business building that often gets overlooked. Before you can consistently take the actions required to build a successful business, you must first become the person who naturally takes those actions. Let me explain what I mean by that. If building your business requires something of you that doesn't match your current identity, who you believe yourself to be, then there's going to be a misalignment. And that misalignment creates resistance, exhaustion, and sometimes self-sabotage. For example, if the business you're building and the impact that you want to have requires you to be visible, to share your message widely, to lead others, but your current identity is as a support person who works behind the scenes or enhances others' messages rather than having one of your own, you're going to struggle to build that business and to have the impact until you shift your identity to become the person who is visible, whose message is valuable, and who leads others. The traditional approach to business growth focuses almost exclusively on strategy and tactics. It says, here's what you need to do to be successful. But it rarely addresses who you need to be to execute those strategies effectively again and again. That's where identity alchemy comes in. It's all about intentionally transforming who you are to align with what you want to create. Now, to really illustrate how powerful this concept can be, I want to take you back to a pivotal moment in my own journey that became the foundation for the talk that I delivered last weekend, and really for the entire Satisfaction Strategy framework. This experience took place in September of 2015. I was at a retreat center in the mountains. I'd been there for 3 days attending a Koya-inspired movement retreat, a practice that had been deeply transformative for me in the previous year. This practice had been my therapy as I left a business that was unsatisfying, a marriage that was unhealthy, and a city where I felt disconnected from the people who mattered the most to me. On the third day of this retreat, something unexpected happened. We were exploring the season of spring, represented by the hummingbird, all about joy and lightness and pleasure and fun. And I found myself completely unable to access those feelings. Instead, I felt angry and frustrated and irritable the entire day, which only made me more upset with myself because how could I not feel joy during the joy portion of the retreat? So I went to bed that night feeling super angry and confused and frustrated. And the next morning, I woke up really early before dawn, and I was still wrestling with this question. Why couldn't I let myself feel joyful? I found myself drawn to the labyrinth on the retreat property. For those of you unfamiliar, the labyrinth is a circular walking path used for meditation. The invitation is to set an intention as you enter of something that you want to release. And that as you're in walking meditation towards the center, you're reflecting on what that is that you want to leave behind. And then to leave something in the middle as a symbol of what you're leaving behind. And as you make your way out, to do so in contemplation of what you're inviting in next. As I stood at the entrance to the labyrinth in the early morning light, I set the intention to release whatever it was that was holding me back from experiencing joy. As I walked, memories began to surface. All the time someone important to me had squashed my excitement, diminished my enthusiasm, belittled my dreams, told me to be quieter, to not draw attention, to not get too excited because you never know what might go wrong. I began picking up wood chips from the path, initially with the idea that I would leave one in the center as my offering, as the thing I was leaving behind. But then I found myself, without even thinking, just picking up one after another until I had an armful of them. When I eventually reached the center, I realized that these wood chips represented all of the memories, all of the moments of disappointment I'd been carrying around that were keeping me from experiencing joy. I placed them in the center of the labyrinth with the intention of leaving them all behind. And as I stood up to my feet, the sun peeked up over the edge of the mountains and touched my face. Walking out of the labyrinth, I felt lighter and freer, my heart genuinely open to possibility again. That's when the revelation hit me. I'd been going about things all wrong. For years, I've been focused on the hustle first, joy later approach. I thought that expansion, abundance, and possibility came first, and then joy would follow that naturally. But in that moment, I realized that that's not how nature works. Summer never ever comes before spring, and joy and pleasure must always come first, and then all that's possible can follow. Just like a gardener must prepare the soil, plant the seeds, and fertilize the earth, we must cultivate joy and happiness and pleasure in our own lives to prepare ourselves for the harvest that's to come. If you're seeking expansion and opportunity and abundance, you must focus on creating joy and pleasure in your life now, not waiting for it to happen someday down the road. This insight completely transformed how I approached business, both for myself and for my clients. I began to see how many purpose-driven entrepreneurs were stuck in this cycle too. Their thought process went something like this: I'll work really, really hard to make more revenue so I can have more impact, and then someday I'll get to enjoy what I created. But that someday rarely comes, or sometimes it shows up and it just doesn't feel the way you thought it was going to feel. Instead, what was happening was a cycle of working harder to make more revenue, which leads to more expenses, which requires more work, all while postponing joy and satisfaction to some mystical future date. This realization was the seed that eventually grew into the satisfaction strategy framework. Understanding that impact, profit, and pleasure aren't competing forces, but synergistic elements that have to work together to create sustainable success. And here's where the story connects directly to today's topic of identity alchemy. To implement this insight, I had to become a different person. I had to transform from someone who believed that success required suffering into someone who trusted that joy could lead to success. I had to shift from someone who put off pleasure until someday to someone who prioritized it as an essential element of my business strategy. That transformation did not happen overnight. It was a process of daily choices, of challenging old beliefs, of practicing new ways of being. And it definitely has not been linear. Like most things, it's been a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, again and again, but always making progress. It's about fundamentally changing how I saw myself and what I believed was possible for me. And that is the essence of identity alchemy. Intentionally becoming the person who naturally thinks and feels and acts in alignment with the business and life that you want to create. Now that I've shared my story, let's talk about how to recognize when you might be experiencing your own identity gap, that space between who you currently are and who you need to become to build the business that you desire. Here are some telltale signs that your current identity might be limiting your business growth. First, consistent procrastination on high impact activities. This is not just about being busy with the wrong things. It's about actively avoiding the very actions that would move your business forward. If you find yourself organizing your files instead of reaching out to potential clients, or endlessly tweaking your website rather than recording that podcast episode, you might be bumping up against an identity limitation. I've talked about procrastination several times in the past, particularly in episode 17, in defense of procrastination, because I have learned that most of the time when we're procrastinating, it's because we are protecting ourselves from something that we're not ready for. And so rather than forcing ourselves to do the thing, my encouragement is always to assess what is it that we're protecting ourselves from and what's the work we need to do to get ourselves ready so that we don't feel that energetic resistance and we don't feel compelled to avoid and procrastinate. What do we need to do to get ourselves in a place energetically where we feel ready and we feel excited rather than forcing ourselves to do the thing against our will? What do we need to do to get ourselves ready to jump into it wholeheartedly? The second sign that your current identity might be limiting your business growth is physical or emotional resistance when you're thinking about certain opportunities. So pay attention to how your body responds when you consider stepping into a bigger role. Do you feel tightness in your chest? Does your stomach knot up? These kind of physical responses are often signals that your current identity doesn't feel safe or comfortable with what you're contemplating. I'll let you in on a little insight, a little secret, a little vulnerable moment around this talk that I put together, which is that I signed up for this speaker training program over a year ago and went through the entire training program. And developing the talk was great. The program was amazing. The teacher, April Pertwee, who was a guest on an earlier episode, I'll share that link as well, is a brilliant teacher. And I learned so much in the process. And when it came time to practicing this talk, which we would do on Zoom with a partner, I struggled incredibly. And part of it was that I was in the depths of perimenopausal brain fog, and I literally could write a sentence and then not tell you what the sentence was that I wrote down. So just like my own capacity, because of health and wellness challenges, were preventing me from being able to execute in a way that I thought was going to be good enough. And what ended up happening the week before the practicum, which was supposed to be a year ago right now, is I got sick. I got really, really, really sick. And it is not lost on me that that sickness included losing my voice. And I hoped that it would go away in a couple of days, but we were 3 days from the event and I sounded like Barry White. It was brutal. And I knew that there was no way I could stand up on that stage and deliver the talk. And so I had to postpone. I had to reschedule. And so it was a full year later before I was able to show up for the next round of April's training and deliver my talk. And it was hard and it was challenging and it pushed my limits. But this time I was ready and I knew I could do it. And when I look back on just the state of being I was in a year ago, I wasn't ready. And my body protected me. My body said, nope, we are not getting up on that stage and doing this. That's an example from my own experience of a physical response that was triggered by trying to step into an identity that I simply was not ready for yet. The third sign is self-sabotage when success is within reach. Perhaps you've noticed that whenever you get close to a breakthrough, something mysteriously goes wrong. You might sleep through an important meeting or get sick right before a major presentation, like I just described, or pick a fight with a key collaborator. These aren't coincidences. They're often unconscious ways that your current identity protects itself from the discomfort of expansion. Fourth, the presence of a persistent inner critic telling you that you are not ready, not qualified, or not deserving. This voice isn't actually protecting you. It's preserving your current identity. When you hear this voice, it's often a sign that you're at the edge of important growth. And finally, a feeling of incongruence between your stated goals and your daily actions. You say you want to build a 7-figure business, but you consistently make choices aligned with staying small. You claim you want to impact thousands, but you shy away from visibility. This misalignment isn't a character flaw. It's simply an identity gap. I experienced versions of all of these signs during my transition from behind-the-scenes strategist to a leader with my own framework. The procrastination was there. How many times did I delay starting this podcast? And it was until somebody really pushed me that I jumped in. The physical resistance was there, getting sick before this speaking opportunity and having to wait an entire year. The self-sabotage was there. How many, technical challenges have I had, or things I was ready to do or ready to put out, and some little thing just broke down and didn't work right. That inner critic was definitely there, constantly questioning if I had anything of value to say. But here's what I've learned. These signs aren't reasons to give up. They're invitations to grow. They're signposts pointing to exactly where your identity needs to evolve. And so the focus should become, how do I evolve and how do I expand so that I am ready to do these things that for some reason right now I'm avoiding? How do we become the person who can naturally and easily build the businesses that we desire and have the impact that we want to have? How do we actually transform our identity? Well, that's what we're going to talk about next. Here are 5 practical steps that I have found to be powerful both for myself and for my clients. Number 1, first, you need to get crystal clear on who it is that you need to become. So this is not about these vague aspirations like more confident or more successful. It's about creating a detailed vision of your evolved identity. Asking yourself, what does this person believe about themselves? How do they make decisions? How do they respond to challenges? How do they interact with other people? How do they prepare for things? What's most important to them? When I was making my shift from behind the scenes support to trusted guide with her own framework and message to share in the world, I had to envision someone who believed her message was valuable, who made decisions based on impact rather than approval, who responded to challenges with curiosity rather than doubt, and who valued her own voice as much as she valued others. Second, identify the gap between your current and desired identity. This is not about judgment or criticism. It's about honest assessment. Where are the biggest disconnects between who you are now and who you need to become? These gaps often show up as the resistance points that I mentioned earlier. For me, one of the biggest gaps was around visibility. My current identity was comfortable with enhancing other people's visibility, but I had deep resistance to my own. Recognizing this gap helped me understand exactly what I needed to shift. Third, create embodiment practices. Identity is not just mental. In fact, most of the time it's not. It's physical and it's emotional. Finding ways to literally practice this new version of yourself is gonna help you get there faster. This might look like power posing before an important call, adopting the speaking patterns of your future self, or dressing as the evolved version of yourself would dress. Go get that pair of shoes or that shirt, or put on the makeup, or, do your hair. In the practice of Koya-inspired movement, we have a ritual that involves dancing as your future self. And so here's what a version of that could look like. Taking a moment to reflect on your current state of being, your current identity, and choosing a song that represents that, and just dancing to that song as your current self. Or I love to do this. I love what we call shuffle. I don't know if it's actually shuffle anymore on any of our apps, but just opening it up, maybe closing your eyes or picking a random playlist and hitting play and just seeing what song comes up and dancing as your current self to that song. And then when that song ends, taking a moment to reflect on your future self and choosing a song that represents your future self and pressing play and dancing to that song as your future self. And then see how you feel at the end of that. Notice the transformation in yourself when you've taken 3 minutes to move your body in the energy of the person that you are becoming. Fourth, design your environment to support your new identity. We are profoundly influenced by our surroundings. Surround yourself with people who see you as you want to become, not as who you've always been. Adjust your physical space to reflect your evolving identity. Expose yourself to ideas and information that reinforce your new beliefs. This was a really big one for me. I had to deliberately seek out communities where I could be seen as a creator and an advocate for a different approach to business rather than the support person. I started joining different mastermind groups and attending different events and building relationships with people who didn't have a predetermined notion of who I was. Fifth, practice micro commitments and celebrate the evidence. Identity transformation isn't a single dramatic shift. It's built through consistent small actions that align with your new self. Each day, commit to one small action that your evolved identity would take, then actively look for and celebrate evidence that you're becoming that person. For me, starting this podcast was a series of micro commitments. First, recording one episode and then sharing it for feedback and then actually publishing it. Each step was a vote for my new identity, and each piece of positive feedback became evidence that this transformation was real and possible. What's fascinating about identity alchemy is that once the transformation begins, it often accelerates. There's momentum that builds. Each aligned action adds to that momentum for the next one. Each piece of evidence strengthens your belief in this new version of yourself. The resistance doesn't disappear overnight, but it does become less powerful as your new identity becomes more established. Okay, remember the labyrinth story, the wood chips I was carrying, those old beliefs, those limiting identities, they were heavy. They took energy to carry. When I put them down, I didn't just release a burden, I freed up energy for something new. The same is absolutely true for you. As you release aspects of your identity that no longer serve your vision, you create space and energy for who you're becoming. And here's the critical insight. This is not about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming more fully who you are. It's about shedding the protective layers, the adaptive behaviors, the limiting beliefs that have kept your authentic self hidden or constrained for way too long. All right, theory is powerful, but transformation in real life can be even more powerful. So I want to share a few examples of clients that I've worked with who experienced remarkable business breakthroughs when they focused on identity transformation. One client that I worked with for several years who had built a business that by any external measure looked incredibly successful, but she had done so doing almost nothing but work for a long, long time. And when I started to ask her some questions about what it was that she wanted to be experiencing and, what would bring her joy in her business and what it was that she was ultimately wanting to create that included an experience for herself that was meaningful. When she finally slowed down and started to think about those questions, it became apparent that she didn't believe that many of those things were possible. And so once her perspective began to shift to believe that she could have all of these things that she desired, here's a few of the things that happened in a very short period of time. Number one, she released some team members who had helped her get where she was, but who were not going to be able to help her get where she was going. And in fact, they had become part of this weight that she was carrying around. Number two, she stopped listening to outside advice and took financial control of her business back for herself. And in a very short period of time, paid off a significant amount of debt and made the company profitable for the first time in a while. She started to invest in better leveraged revenue opportunities that would allow her to focus on what her gifts were and get her out of the work that was weighing her down. And this is my favorite. For so many years, her business had been her number one priority. And with that, she had not been opening herself up to the possibility of a love relationship. And once she saw the possibility that she could have both, that she could be a person who had a profitable, successful business and a meaningful relationship, guess what? It fell into place like absolute magic. What I think is particularly interesting about this example is how both the business results and the personal results directly followed her identity shift, her shift in perspective that things had to be done a certain way to the possibility that things could be done in a way that allowed her to have all of the things that she desired. This external transformation was a natural expression of the internal one that was happening. Another client that I worked with, and I would say that this is a fairly common pattern that I've seen in the women who come my way. This woman was a very successful executive with an incredible career and track record who, when she ventured into the entrepreneur world, did so operating under the belief system that she was a beginner, she identified as a beginner. And so she followed all of the instructions that any beginner entrepreneur would follow. And when our paths crossed, and I invited her to reflect on the fact that she was not, in fact, a beginner, that maybe she was new at like some of the specific tactical things that she was working on, but that she certainly wasn't new at her work in the world. In fact, she had decades of expertise in that area. And that she didn't need to build her business the same way as someone who was, 25 years old, who was venturing into something for the very first time without decades of experience would start their business. I see this happen again and again where women are undercharging because they think they're a beginner, because they're a beginner in their entrepreneurship journey, but they are not a beginner in life, and they are not a beginner in their area of expertise. And for her, making that shift, that recognition that she is not a beginner, that she is an experienced expert with valuable skills, allowed her to start charging higher rates and raise her expectations of the types of clients that she would get, the types of contracts she would get, and what the experience of serving those people would look like. I think this experience illustrates really well how our own perception of ourselves, our own beliefs around what's required of us or how things are supposed to be done can really get in our way. But with the right support and a shift in perspective, we can move past all of that. Another client who had built his business as a solo practitioner, a solo coach, who had shifted into a realm of hiring other coaches and building a team and wanting to grow and grow pretty significantly. In our conversation, I realized that he still viewed himself as a coach and was approaching his business as a coach. And so the perspective shift that needed to happen was from being a coach to being a leader of coaches, a teacher of coaches. And when he got that, when that clicked, his entire energy shifted, his entire presence, the way he approached his business, the way he interacted with his team, all of that shifted. The common thread in all of these stories is that sustainable business growth requires personal evolution first. These clients didn't just implement new strategies or tactics, they became different people who naturally took different actions. And that's the real key to lasting transformation. As we bring this episode to a close, I want to emphasize something important. Identity alchemy isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice, a constant evolution. Just as your business grows and changes, so too will the identity required to sustain and expand it. The key is to approach this evolution with curiosity and compassion rather than judgment. When you notice resistance, when you bump up against limitations in your current identity, see these moments as invitations to grow rather than signs of failure. What I found both personally and with my clients is that this inside-out approach to business building creates something truly magical, a kind of effortless effort. When who you are aligns with what you're creating, strategies that once felt exhausting suddenly feel energizing. Goals that seem impossibly far away start to feel naturally within reach. This is the true essence of the Satisfaction Strategy framework. Understanding that sustainable success comes from the integration of impact, profit, and pleasure, all flowing from a core identity that's aligned with your deepest values and your highest vision. As I experienced in that labyrinth years ago, and again last weekend during my talk, joy must come before expansion. Becoming the person who can experience joy in the journey is essential to creating the business results that you desire. So I invite you to reflect on these questions as you go through your week. Who do you need to become to build the business you truly want and to have the impact that you are here to make? What aspects of your identity are ready for an upgrade? What beliefs, patterns, or old stories are you ready to leave behind in the center of your own metaphorical labyrinth? I can say from experience, this work is not always easy, but I promise you it's worth it. The business you build from a place of aligned identity will be more sustainable, more satisfying, and ultimately more successful than anything you could create through strategy and willpower alone. If this topic resonates with you, then be sure to catch next week's episode where I'll be diving even deeper into identity transformation, exploring the specific methodologies from experts like James Clear, Gay Hendricks, and Dr. Joe Dispenza that have profoundly influenced both my approach and the Satisfaction Strategy framework. We'll look at how their work on habits, upper limits, and neurological rewiring can accelerate your own identity evolution. Until then, I encourage you to take one small step today toward becoming the person your business needs you to be. Remember, transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens one aligned choice at a time. Thank you so much for listening. As always, remember that your pleasure is your power. Take care.